For a long time, I thought I would love to be able to find a string to put on a lot of the childhood experiences that I remembered. A lot of them were funny, and some of them were kind of sad, and the people that I'd known and some of the guys that I hung out with that really weren't headed anywhere except down blind alleys. And nothing came and nothing came. And what you do when nothing comes is you don't push, you just put it aside. And there came a day when I thought to myself, if these guys go somewhere, if there's a reason for them to go somewhere and do something, what could it be? And I came up with the idea of them going down the train tracks to look for the body of a kid. And I made up a situation whereby they would know the body was there and that they could go and find it. And everything else follows from that. I think that most stories, good stories about boys, are stories about journeys.
He writes these wonderful characters, and he writes wonderful dialogue, and most of the times they're encased in these kind of horrific, supernatural type pieces. This was really bereft of that. It was a real character piece and a character study, and very personal to Stephen King, because it was kind of his life.
My memories of boyhood was that it was a riot, that it was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of funny stuff that happened, and I tried to put a lot of that into the story. And Rob tried to put a lot of that into the movie too, and he had a nice cast, and I think that aside from the material, which clearly appealed to his sense of humor, I think that he must have resonated with some of the boyhood experiences because the direction is so sure-handed.
I found my own way into it through my own personal experience and said, Gordy has to be the main character. It's all about your little boy who doesn't feel good about himself, who's looking for approval, can't get it from his father, and looks to his friends to be bolstered and find that approval and feel good about himself. And once I hit upon that, I said, okay, I can tell this story, because those are feelings I had felt as a young kid growing up and trying to, make my way in the world.
There are certain rites of passage that all boys go through with their friends. The first time that we went away from home, the first time that we really had to face something frightening by ourselves, the first time that you face death, the first time that you face disillusion about your parents, the first time that you have to face a situation where you know if you don't back off a step, you're going to be hurt. These are all things that boys go through, and they're part of what makes boys men.
I was experiencing that coming of age even at the time when I was making the film, which was well into my 30s, because I got strength from my friends even as I got older, and I was always looking for approval from my father and always felt that I wasn't really seen by him, and so I gained a lot of strength from my friends.
I've known Rob since I was 15. He was a little older, like some months. When you're 15, that counts. He was 15 and a half. You know what I mean? And we spent a great deal of time together. We saw every movie ever released together and talked about them, and we did theater games, and he directed a show that I did.
Richard Dreyfuss was not initially the one that we cast in that part. It needed to have kind of a had to have a sense of humor and a bit of whimsy to it and a kind of a satirical edge to it, and at the same time be dramatic and capture the emotional feeling of the piece. We tried a lot of different people, and we just couldn't get the right tone. And finally, when Rick Dreyfuss came in, it was perfect.
The writing, if I remember correctly, was self-evident. It led you to a certain tone. You didn't want to fight that tone. It was already there.
When you're casting 12-year-old boys and 13-year-old boys, you really have to cast close to their personalities. I mean, you can't ask kids of that age to go very far away from who they are in terms of their characters. They don't have the craft yet. They're not developed yet. So I try to find kids who did have the qualities of those characters. With Gordy and getting Wil Wheaton, he had a very doe-like face, very sensitive. He's a very intelligent young man. He was very intelligent even then, and he projected that intelligence and that sensitivity.
I think that it is such a credit to Rob that he was able to cast 4 pre-teenage boys that could just show up and be themselves and say the words and do what the movie demanded of them.
With River Phoenix, there needed to be this kind of wizened peacemaker, this kind of earth person, and that he was. He came from a background. He lived as a hippie, and his parents, lived out of a VW microbus and all of that. And he was a vegetarian. They lived off the land and so on. And he had those qualities. Teddy Duchamp, played by Corey Feldman, had a lot of anger in him because of his family background. There was a broken home. There was a lot of negative influences and difficulty in his life, and he brought a lot of that to the part in the anger that you see in him on camera.
There was no other kid that walked in the room that had as much pain and turbulence going on in his life as I did, and he could see that shining through, and that's what made him say, this has got to be the guy to play this character, because the character had so much turmoil and so much turbulence in his life that they had to find an actor who you could really feel it in the eyes. You could really see in there that there was some legitimacy to that.
And then you have Jerry O'Connell, who was probably the least formed. He was only 11 years old when we started shooting, had no experience at all. And he was kind of a wacky, goofy kid, and he was perfectly suited for his part. When he came in to read for me, he didn't even know what was going on. He didn't know who I was. I mean, gave the reading, and he was like perfect. And I thought, and then he left, and then he came back because he forgot his jacket or something, and he looked at me and says, "Are you that guy on Channel 5?
I thought I was meeting Archie Bunker. So, I practiced the script with my mom, and I was very excited about practicing it with my mom because there was cursing in it, so I'm there cursing with my mom, and I'm like, Mom, I'm allowed to say the S and F word because it says it in the script. And that was like very exciting for me. And I walked into the room and I saw Rob Reiner, and I said to him, wait a minute, you're not Archie, you're Meathead.
And I thought, this kid is so natural and so Vern-like, but could he act Vern? It's one thing to be that kid, and there's another thing to act that part. But I took a chance with him, and he turned out great. All of them turned out great. And then when I got him up to Oregon before shooting, I got them up a couple of weeks ahead of time, and we basically we did acting classes.
We spent the first week just playing what I learned later on were theater games, doing trust exercises and improv games and things like that.
And that's what I taught these kids, how to play theater games, how to relate to each other, how to throw the ball back and forth verbally, physically, to get them to do all of this. And then we started working with characters and understanding character.
At the time, you don't even think about it. You think it's like, hey, we're playing games with a bunch of kids, and Rob's like this big kid, and he's hanging out with us, and Andy Scheinman is playing video games with us.
But when I look back across the years, I can see that he was probably taking this time to get us comfortable with each other so that we would feel like we had really known each other, so that we would have some kind of bonds together. Then we spent the second week actually rehearsing individual scenes. Then we went out onto the locations.
There was a lot of rehearsing done on this film. More rehearsing than I've ever done since, really. It really shows in the quality of the work.
Well, most of the times you see with very young actors, you'll see a lot of cuts, bits and pieces where a young actor is spoon-fed by a director with a line reading or something. A director will stand off camera and just feed the line, and then finally the actor will get it just the right way, and they'll have that little moment on film. They can cut it in and create the performance in the editing room. But if you look in Stand By Me, there are a number of sustained scenes where you see all four of them in the shot. And they're all picking up their cues in the right way. Their timing is good. They know what moments to stress. It's like a piece of music. They know what notes to hit. I think it's a testament to how well we trained them and how hard we worked on these scenes. I wanted to be able to shoot every scene in one without having to cut and make it work. And we were able to do that.
I wasn't scared of anybody on the set. Once again, kid from New York coming out to Hollywood. Nobody scared me. Kiefer Sutherland scared me. Kiefer Sutherland really made himself very menacing to the four of us. Looking back, he was doing it just to be a character and make sure that we were scared of him. And man, it worked. I was scared of that dude.
Kiefer plays a great heavy, and considering the fact that he is very soft-spoken, he is kind of a sweet guy and a very intelligent person, and comes from a great theater background, I guess it's fun for him to get to play those parts.
He was just a bully. He was the worst nightmare, and we've all run into them in school. He was the bully. The driving force, certainly between Wil Wheaton's character and mine, was that I had taken his brother's hat.
That's the hat that Denny gave to him, and that's the hat that means so much to Gordy. Anything that his brother would have given him, he loves his brother so much. His brother, he looked up to his brother, and his brother was the kind of buffer between him and his father. So to take anything away from him that was his brother's would be most hurtful to Gordy. And the fact that to the older boys, it doesn't mean anything. They're just fooling around with him. They're just playing with him.
People ask me all the time, why didn't you make Ace give you your hat back at the end of the movie? I asked Rob that question. I think when we shot the thing, I said, why don't I get my hat back? And he said, he threw that hat away when he went around the corner.
Rob and I had talked about that actually specifically. Because I remember my initial instinct was to put it on. And Rob said, no, it doesn't matter that much to you. You'd never mess up your hair.
Well, that scene creates tremendous sympathy for the young boys and paints the two older boys as really evil. And using a thing like the hat, which is very important to Gordy, we can communicate a tremendous amount and set up our villains and create a tremendous amount of sympathy for our heroes.
With regards to my character, he really came in to push them from point A to B to C to D. And Rob was really clear in telling me that. Be mean enough to make them go farther into the forest. Be mean enough to make them go find the body. In the end, be mean enough to make them stand up for you.
I lived in a farmhouse, and there were a number of connected sheds behind it. And at the back of the third or fourth shed, at the end of the line anyway, there was a ladder up the side and a trap door, and there was this skirgy loft room. We cleaned it up a little bit. We put in a table so we could play scat for pennies or rummy or whatever. It was a place where we could be.
It was a real treehouse that they really built in a real tree. And it was so cool.
I asked somebody, was this treehouse here when we came up here? They're like, no, the set designer built it. This is all designed. And I remember, wow, this really looks like a real treehouse.
One thing that I remember from that whole sequence is the whole thing with the secret knock. I was 12 years old, and I said, you know what would be cool? Is if he does the thing, and I say it's not secret knock, and he says, I forget secret knock, and then we all look at each other and we all say Vern. And it's in the movie.
We came up with that in rehearsal, and we came up with the fact that Vern never could remember the secret knock, no matter what, and he would say, it's Vern, let me in. No, you don't do the secret knock. You can't, even though they knew it was him, they didn't want to let him in. I mean, every kid, can remember having a treehouse. I mean, I had one when I was that age. I built it with my friend David Krautheimer, and it was not quite as elaborate as the one in Stand By Me, but we had it, and we used to go up and sit in it, and you felt all powerful when you were in that treehouse.
When I was in college, there was a trestle that went across the river. And one of the rites of passage at that time was that you had to go out and cross the Stillwater River on the trestle.
There was one scene when they were on the trestle, and they were running, in front of the train. Now, the train was so far behind them that there was no real danger that anything would happen to them. And when I had a close-up of them, when they were running, I wanted them to be, terrified and crying and all this. And when we shot it, they weren't doing it.
Rob didn't think we were scared enough. He didn't believe that we were scared. And I remember it's the one time Rob raised his voice at me and at Jerry also.
And we had a dolly track set up where the dolly grips were pulling this camera along a dolly track, trying to keep up with them running like this. And it was hard. They would one after the other. And finally I said to them, you two, I says, if you're not going to be frightened, I said, these men are tired. They don't want to push this camera anymore. They're tired, and they don't. And the reason I have to keep pushing it is because of you. You're not doing what. And I started yelling like this at him. I says, and if you're not worried, if you're not going to cry because you're worried about that train coming after you, you better start crying because I'm going to come after you. Like this, I started, and then they started crying. I said, roll the camera, and they started running, and they're crying.
I remember Rob screaming and it like really upsetting me, and like that, you know, when you're a kid and you start to like shake and maybe cry a little bit, maybe it all sort of comes out.
And they finished it, and they ran off camera, and they went, Rob, see, we did it, we were crying. And they were so excited, and they jumped on top of me, and they were so happy. At a moment, I felt a little bit, oh, should I have pushed them? But I knew it was okay. I knew it'd be okay because they trusted me, and they felt comfortable enough with me to be able to do that. And then they were great, and they were so happy for it.
Man, like looking back, how brilliant was Rob Reiner? I mean, look at the performance he got out of me. That's not me acting when that train is chasing me. That's Rob Reiner. That's all Rob Reiner.
It's very rare to find directors who know how to get in there and mix it up. Come on, let's get in and do this performance. Let's design some moments. Let's change this and do that. Very few directors bother anymore.
If I'm any good as a director at all, it's because I was an actor. I think everything I do, I approach from the standpoint of an actor. And it's like a coach of a sports team. I would never ask an actor to do something that I couldn't do. In other words, if I'm asking a ball player to stop and hit a 20-foot jump shot, I better be able to hit to stop and hit a 20-foot jump shot under pressure. And so I will never ask an actor to make a transition that I can't make.
And I think it was because he was so proficient as an actor, and still is, that he can allow you to feel like you're discovering a moment when in fact he's telling you it.
And as I grew older, I started to hear about the actor's director, and I realized, oh, well, that's Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner's the actor's director. And most actors like to work with actors' directors. It's just the difference between someone who understands what actors do versus someone who's more concerned with the technical aspects of things. Well, they had dug a big hole for this swamp and filled it up with water. And we all had wetsuits and stuff on underneath, but it was still really gross because there was mud in the water, you couldn't see through it and everything, and it was cold. I remember it being so cold.
Yes, the water was cold, but I kind of had issues with those guys that day. You know, I mean, here we are. It was a scene. It's a big scene. We go in. There are leeches. Wil Wheaton's character faints. It's like a pretty important scene. And I was like, this is so funny. We're going to make believe we're walking and we're going to fall in a pool. And these guys were like, I remember thinking, this is the only time I ever thought on the set. I was like, yo, these guys are way too Hollywood.
I was always curious as to what things actually happened to Stephen King and what things were made up. And he told me about this scene with the leeches.
We go in, and it was great, and we're splashing around and grab-assing like kids do, you know. And all at once, my friend David Hanna did a handstand. You know, he went down, and his legs come up out of the water like that. And I thought it was mud at first. And I got a little closer, and I go, Jesus Christ, David, you're covered with bloodsuckers. He just passed out in the water. We dragged him over to the shore, and we were all covered with it.
Everybody felt safe and secure because it was a man-made pool. We're not walking out into the middle of the forest and just dumping into some awful, swamp that's been there for 50 years. But here's the joke of it. We started the movie like in June, and we finished like in August. So they built the thing in June. So it was still sitting out there in the middle of the forest with all the trees and the swamps and the bugs and everything. So, I mean, it was by that time, by August when we got to filming in the damn thing, it was an actual swamp.
I have been told by people of my parents' generation that the really deep debate about the nature of Goofy and Wagon Train and all of that is something that they all had.
It's very common now for people to do that in movies and TV shows, to reach back to their own history and their own past and bring back the 70s or the 80s or whatever. But I think that Rob was the first guy to do that. I remember when I watched the film that I sprang to attention at that moment because we had done that. Rob and I had done that with our friends. It was a part of our lives which we thought was unique to us. And Rob was able to see that it wasn't unique to us at all. It was a universal thing. And I think I truly fell in love with the film at that moment.
The audience goes through this very wrenching scene with Chris, where you see that Chris has been labeled a bad kid, and he feels that there's nothing he can do to overcome that. That is something that resonates with everyone, whether you are that kid or you know that kid. It's a tough scene to watch.
And in fact, the milk money was stolen when I was in the 7th grade. And if I'd been the kid in charge of taking it around. It would have been, oh, something terrible happened, somebody came in and stole the money. Because I had a good boy reputation. Whereas this other kid who was doing it that week did not have a good boy reputation, and he was suspended from school. And I can still remember how hurt he was. And he said, this always happens to me, whether it's my fault or not. They think that it's my fault.
The scene where Chris breaks down at the tree when they're standing guard in the forest at night is my favorite scene in the whole movie. It's the most emotional scene, and it's powerful for a couple of reasons. One is it's beautifully written. It's taken mostly from the book by Stephen King, and it does talk about a time when a child is let down by an adult. I mean, which is a devastating thing for a child when an adult does something to disappoint you or lie to you or cheat you in some way. That's a terrible blow to a child. That's one thing. And the other thing is the two performances by River Phoenix and Wil Wheaton. When we did that scene, River had to carry that very emotional thing at the end where he breaks down and cries over having been hurt by this teacher in the school. When he did it the first couple of times, he didn't have all the emotion that he needed for the scene. I talked to him about some sense memory, and I said, is there a moment in your life where you can recall an adult letting you down and betraying you in some way? I said, you don't have to tell me what it is. I just want you to think about it, and if there is that moment, maybe you can think about that, and that'll help you in the scene. And he went off and he thought, and he says, okay, I'm ready to do it. And he did the scene, and as you see, it's beautiful. He breaks down and he cries. And again, it was one of those times when I think he felt comfortable enough with me to really expose himself at that point in the film. And then after the scene was over, I went and I hugged him and I told him I loved him, and he gave me a big hug, and he felt better. But it took him a while to get over it. Obviously, there was something that was very hurtful to him in his life that he connected with in order to make that scene work. The scene where Gordy is up, the other boys are sleeping, and he's sitting by the railroad tracks, and it's the dawn. The sun is just coming up. And it's one of these moments that, as described in the book, was a very emotional moment for him where he made this connection with nature.
I worked very hard on that scene because I didn't want it to be corny. I didn't want it to be like a velvet painting. I wanted it to be as true as possible, and I wanted it to have as much texture as possible. It's of a piece with the rest of the story. This is a story about kids who are discovering the world. And a lot of the experiences that they go through are horrible, and some of them are funny. But I thought that there ought to be at least one experience that was sort of transcendent.
I have been told that when I look at the doe, and the doe looks back at me, that our faces look exactly the same. That we have similar eyes, that we have a similar expression on our face. What that scene says to me is that after we've seen this really horrible thing that's happened to Chris, that there's still this kind of just purity in the world.
Rather than cheapening it and trying to describe it to his friends, he held it to himself and kept it to himself. And that's a moment that, as he says in the narration, it's a moment that I've never talked of, spoken of, or written of until this moment.
The most important things are the hardest to say. You can't talk about them because once you start, they tarnish.
The film, after the scene with the deer, it becomes darker, and it becomes less about we're on this exciting adventure, we pulled one over on our parents, and it becomes more about we're going to see a dead kid. And I even say, as an adult in the movie, he wasn't sleeping, he wasn't unconscious, he was dead. And I think the line is the train had knocked Ray Brower out of his head like it had knocked the life out of his body.
We see that moment at which Gordy is made to feel good by his friend Chris, and for the first time we see the genesis of this boy becoming a real writer, and how the fears that this young boy has about not being loved by his father and feeling that his father hates him, and that this friend of his steps in at a time when this boy is most needy and is able to support him and make him feel good about himself and tell him that someday you'll write about us. And these will be the experiences that you draw from that will inform your capacity as a writer. I was actually crying writing the scene because it cut very deeply into my own personal experiences about my relationship to my father and the feelings I had towards him and the feelings that I had that he, that I felt that he didn't love me. Now, of course, he does love me. I know he loves me. I love him now. But at the time when I was growing up, I had those feelings that the little boy had, and I was able to imbue that scene with it so that when I went to direct Wil, I knew exactly what needed to happen in that scene. It was the emergence of Gordy. It was that transition. That rite of passage happens in that scene and ultimately winds up with Gordy picking up the gun and standing off against these older boys, which was not in the novel. They had Chris Chambers picking up the gun, and we had Gordy do it because it was his evolution.
This is one of the things that I learned from Rob that I still use to this day in my acting. When someone comes from a place of power and they're real secure in what they're doing, they don't have to raise their voice, they don't have to make idle threats or anything like that. And you see so clearly the change from we're going to be on TV, I brought the comb, all that stuff, and it changes to this is not the right way to do it. This is a human being. And that's really sort of the arc of the movie, that we come through that, and that event changes all of us forever.
Rob had a different view about who the hero was of the story. For me, Gordy is more narrator than he is heroic figure. I felt that if there was a hero, it was a tragic hero, it was Chris Chambers. And so I was more interested in seeing Chris through Gordy's eyes than I was in seeing Gordy himself. But I don't have a problem with that because books and movies are apples and oranges. They're both delicious, but they don't taste the same at all. And I'm happy if it works. It's great.
What happened to the river is so sad, and every time I look at the film, it makes me very sad. It's hard for me to look at the last part of the film.
It's a very sad thing for me because I feel that I was that close to being able to help him.
There's a line that Dylan Thomas has, after the first death, there is no other.
River Phoenix was not a flavor of the month. He was not a flash in the pan. He was going to be an actor with longevity.
He was the most talented young actor of his time.
When he made a choice to do something, boy, he followed through with it, and with a sincerity that was captivating and striking.
River was the best there was. River was a man with a future. You could see it coming right out of him, You could see his work, you could see his variety, you could see his level of talent was superior.
And it's especially chilling at the end of the movie because River Phoenix's character passes away. And when you watch it now and like River Phoenix's character disappears, it's got a much deeper meaning than I think was initially intended.
The experience of filming Stand By Me was truly what you get on film. It really was, for each one of us in our own way, a coming-of-age time in our life. That period was exactly what you see. It was 4 kids in the middle of nowhere growing up with each other and in front of you.
I remember when that summer was over and I was genuinely sad to leave those guys. I mean, it was genuinely hard for me to part with everybody.
It wasn't about coming of age to me. It was about my friendship with Rob. Later on, I had this gift given to me. Hey, you did this thing here, but look what it is. And I had given no thought to that. It was wonderful. And it was about my life. Isn't that a shock?
Whatever difficulties I was going through as a kid and whatever difficulties I went through even during the time of making the film, it was the most important time for me because through those difficulties and through those struggles with coming to grips with who I am, it made me a better person. It also made the experience that much more rich for me. And I look back on it as the richest experience I've had in making a film.
Rob Reiner made this very personal to him, and it made it then very easy as an actor, as a young actor, to work for him, because it felt like we were telling his story.
And it's such a credit to Rob Reiner for allowing me to feel that way, for allowing me to feel like I fit in there, and it was okay to be there, that I was part of his team making this great movie.
It seemed to me that Stand By Me was the first really completely successful adaptation of my work. It was a deeply felt story for me because as a writer, it was a story that stepped outside the horror genre. There's nothing particularly supernatural about the story, although it runs a gamut of emotions. And I felt that Rob Reiner responded to that and was made better by it and basically realized the story as a film, which doesn't happen very often in a creative person's life.